David, are you ready? Should we get going? You guys ready? All right. There we go. That's all right. Okay, so I'd like to call the meeting to order of the February 21st, 2013 West Sacramento City Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to ask Vice Chair Perez to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. As a reminder, anyone wishing to address the Commission should fill out a request to address form and present it to the clerk. Let's get started with general administrative functions. And also as a reminder, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the Commission. The Commission is prohibited by law from discussing issues not on the agenda brought to them at this time. David, we'll get started with correspondence and staff communications.
Yes, I have one item I'd like to bring to your attention tonight. You should have before you a flyer regarding an upcoming free Planning Commissioner training workshop. It's going to be March 6th in Folsom. This is free, and I would strongly encourage planning commissioners to attend this if they like to, especially because two of the presenters, Janet Ruggiero and Larry Mentier, are probably the two single most experienced and creative and experienced planning minds in this region has to offer. And so this is a rare opportunity to kind of learn from two of the best this profession has ever seen. So I would strongly encourage commissioners to make the attempt to attend this if you can. If you have questions offline or if you want us to contact them on your behalf, we'll be happy to do that. But again, that's March 6th in Folsom, starting at 5 o'clock. So that's all for staff communications.
Thank you. At this time, do we have any disclosure of ex parte communications? Nothing? Great. Move on to the consent agenda. Consideration of approval from the minutes of the February 7th, 2013 Planning Commission. Does anybody wish to discuss the minutes? Any issues? Look for a motion.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Motion by Commissioner Moore.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Liebig. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All against say nay. Passes. Thank you. So moving on to the regular agenda, item number 2, the continued public hearing on Planning Commission Resolution 13-1 regarding master planning of the Grand Gateway project area. And David, we'll turn it over to you. I'm sorry, Mr. Bermudez.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Good evening, all commissioners and Chairman Galvan. This is an opportunity for staff to get in front of the Planning Commission and discuss a little bit further and seek your approval and recommendation to the City Council forwarding on the Grand Gateway Master Planning Development Plan that you sort of recently in December of last year, on December 6th, had an opportunity to go through a workshop on this particular effort and give staff some good guidance and direction as it relates to furthering along this final document. I should note too that subsequent to the December 6th meeting, staff did take this before the City Council in a workshop format. I believe it was January 9th, and we pretty much did the same kind of drill and routine that we did with the Planning Commission almost a month prior. And in some ways, this is a little bit, from a sequencing standpoint, different, because usually we bring an item to Commission and we ask for your direction, guidance, and then we bring back a kind of final document and do what we're asking you to do today. But the reason we chose to do this was partly based on the Council's input and inquiry on this site, as well as the grant performance schedule that was that we faced. We definitely wanted to spend a lot of the quality time that we had with our consultant as part of the grant to drill down on a very, very refined document that is nearly complete. And we felt that if we advance this further without going to council, then we may be a little bit too far along and when we ended up going back to council, we may had to run into a condition where, one, we didn't have enough funding, or there would be substantial overhauls. So the document in front of you tonight that we're asking you to forward on to City Council includes a lot of the interaction and discussion from the City Council. As you know, and I mentioned prior that this is a grant, and in the workshop I did reference that it is with the Local Government Commission. The Local Government Commission oversees the grant. The grant actually is with the Infill Streamlining Program, and this is your local air quality district on the Sacramento side of the river. The grant package was $100,000 of the reward, and this was to be split between staff and the consultant that we hired, which is Opticos. And with that grant, the key objectives that they were seeking to accomplish with the grant is looking at mixed-use type of development, looking at the associated impacts of mixed use as it pertains to vehicular trips, bike and ped walkability and circulation. And as long as we covered kind of those key objectives, they were open for staff to kind of pursue a form document for approval that captured some design elements as well as provided good quality guidance. As you are aware and detailed in your staff report, the project is site is city owned, and it encompasses several planning documents: the Washington Specific Plan, West Capitol Design Action Plan, and the Bridge District Specific Plan. And based on the slide in front of you, those colors are coordinated respective to those plans. So with the site having 3 different areas, there is a little bit of a crossover as far as design guidelines and design details. And so what we wanted to do with the extra effort is put into some reasonable, comprehensive guidance and design guidelines for future development of this site. The site is a key gateway site, hence the reason Grand Gateway. We do see with the future of streetcar coming into the city that this is going to be a key node in this location, and we definitely want to plan it for mixed use, which fits in within the spirit of the grant that we received from the ISP. So in doing so, we definitely wanted to make sure that we developed a guideline and some policies and some standards that were definitely going to be flexible, because this is a city-owned piece. As I mentioned, we're hopeful to market it at some day, or based on the work effort that we produce, maybe we may be able to capture future development without even having to go market the site. But I think with what we have completed so far puts us in a very good position to advance future development at this site. As far as how Opticos, our consultant and staff, looked at this particular site, you may recall that in the earlier workshop, we presented some framework options noted there on the left, A, B, and C. And in doing the reconnaissance and the analysis and just background related activity, the consultant determined that there were some key objectives, and those objectives are on the top portion of this particular table, which is to focus on the activity at that location of the site. Definitely consider the West Capitol View Corridor, and definitely continue to allow that access and connection to West Capitol, and highlight as well a civic component at the site, and look into and explore how adequate block size and circulation can work together given the intricacies of the site and its layout and its existing context. So this was kind of the foundation to kind of start the process. And as you recall, we did have a couple of community meetings with members. We noticed it heavily in this area. And it was well received, and we did receive some comments. Those comments are within your appendix of the document, as well as we came back on one of those days to the Planning Commission and went over the objectives as well in the intent. So where this drilled down to is the shape of the document that's before you tonight. And in general, the document's a little bit different than your standard, especially for us planners, your standard zoning type of ordinance. This is a different element. It's called the form-based code. And as you see within the table, I laid it out so you see kind of the conventional zoning, and then you see kind of the aspects of the form-based code. And what was determined, especially with our consultant, because they are noted for being heavily focused on form-based code, was that this was a specific planning area. It was definitely not throughout the whole city that we're looking to change or add any requirements. And again, we're not looking at the bad of this site. We're looking at being proactive. As I mentioned, we want to market this site. We want, community goals, and we want the objectives of the community to be reinforced with the site. And definitely, it does, as you have reviewed the planning document, it is about form and design, and it connects that, makes that connection. And definitely there's, the pedestrian-friendly element as well as the mixed-use component that we're looking to achieve here. And I think one thing that I really appreciate about the document is just the use of the graphics and the intensity. I think it's, in a way, it is a little bit prescriptive to some degree, but I think the important note that you'll see, and I'll get to that a little bit when we get into building form, is that it is prescriptive to some degree, but I think in a minimum state. There's a lot of minimum requirements. There's not so much of maximum requirements. And that, again, is to allow kind of that flexibility to give us an opportunity to work with a developer that may come in the future. So I know you have the document in front of you, but I wanted to kind of just share what some of the essential components and of a form-based code. And as you see, the 1 through 7, there's no set requirement that it has to be end all of all these particular chapters or components, but I think you'll see that we do have the regulating plan, which is the map and the area, and we combined the building form and the frontage type standards in a chapter, and we got independent thoroughfare standard chapter as well. And so what we try to do, as I kind of already covered, is within the various chapters, you'll see kind of the prescriptive nature as well as the flexibility based on the set requirements that allows maximum utility of the site and flexibility. And again, with this plan as well, you'll see some optional components, which we include some brief architectural design standards. We didn't want to spend a heavy amount of time and effort into that based on the budget costs, but as just to reiterate, design review will still be sought out through staff level, and it will be subject to these particular standards in the future. And if you want, Katie and I kind of discussed this prior to the presentation. If there's any questions that we can kind of answer as we go through these chapters, I'm more than open right now to entertain any questions, or we can kind of continue on with the presentation. Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Katie Yancey. I'm with the Community Development Department, and I occasionally am loaned out to the Planning Division to engage in these kinds of activities. The last time I presented to this commission was with the Bridge District update and with the streetscape guidelines. So some of the things that we've done here will look familiar to those of you who sat through that presentation a few years ago, because this is just a smaller scale version of what we attempted to do with the Bridge District update. And one of the things that we focused on, both in that project, but what was the primary function of this grant, was to look at walkability and transit-oriented standards that really meant to focus on creating new connections to a small publicly owned site, about 10 acres, that we consider to be fringe properties of these 3 planning areas that Jim mentioned earlier. And we wanted to say, how can we make this work as a micro-village, but also have greater connectivity to the surrounding areas and really have it function independent and then interdependently with the surrounding area. And so we looked at, and we did this with Opticos, at creating a similar street hierarchy that was described in the Bridge District specific plan that said, what streets do we need to have people move through? What streets do we anticipate having cyclists on? And which streets do we anticipate will have heavy pedestrian traffic? And we've created walkable blocks to encourage those kinds of trips. And we've really focused in the building form section and the frontage sections on creating a really pleasant pedestrian experience. So you'll see this concept of enhancing connectivity throughout the remaining chapters that deal with the design details. The whole goal is to end up with a mixed-use development that creates active uses, 24-hour users, and creates people that are coming and going at all hours of day through all types of modes of travel. And we want people to feel like they can exist in this small little community and go out to the larger community and come back and sort of feel like they can do everything in this one space. And we really wanted to make sure that the mixed-use development occurred in a manner that supported the streetcar that the council has been so engaged in promoting, and that we looked at reducing automobile trips because this grant is funded in order to do that. It's to reduce vehicle miles traveled and to improve air quality. In order to do that, we also have to look at where people put their cars when they're not using them. And we have to understand the relationship between development and parking. And so as a little way to remember it, we've come up with this idea of parking smart. And the idea is to look at structured parking and make sure that you're managing the supply of parking in a way that encourages transit use, that you're using your infill site efficiently and you're taking advantage of existing infrastructure, not having to go out and build new roads, that you're accessing these parking structures in a manner that allows through traffic to continue to flow, and that you're meeting your requirements for your parking standards in different ways. Stacked parking, valet parking, shared parking like zip cars. And so you're giving people the access that they need, and you're also creating like loading and unloading zones, on-street parking, and you're taking a comprehensive approach to parking, which is something that we anticipate doing when we're moving forward, not only with our general plan updates as we make amendments to the zoning to allow for land uses that encourage this kind of dense development and light parking, but also incorporate this into a larger waterfront parking program that the City Council has been requesting from staff for the past few years once the Bridge District came online. Is there any questions about that material? I'd be happy to answer them at this time, or we can move on to building form.
Actually, I have one. If you go back just to the walking radius slide, since you have it right here.
Would you please? Technical difficulties. There we are.
The streetcar corner, taking that corner, I remember when we were looking at the streetcar layout, I seem to recall something about rounding that corner. Is the streetcar going to be able to make a 90-degree right corner there?
I don't actually have an answer to that question, but what I can tell you is if for some reason that the way that the infrastructure is in place, and I know we're looking to be very successful with a grant application here soon for streetcar, there is excess right-of-way that we could go into if we needed to make some amendments to the sidewalk to allow for additional curb to, that curb radius to occur with streetcar. I just don't know if we've contemplated that in the existing.
That easement was exactly my concern.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we don't lose that.
Yeah, I think that would be one of the things that we would be hoping to get direction on from the council as we move forward towards implementation to ensure that we don't lose that excess right-of-way.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, would you mind? Katie, did I understand you to say that you thought we had a streetcar grant coming our way now? Is that what you just said?
There was a ULI meeting this morning that they mentioned that at the ULI meeting that they had heard that 2015, our city manager was one of the presenters, and he did mention that he thought 2015 was around the time frame that we would be able to apply for federal money for streetcar.
Oh, we could apply, but there's no grant coming our way yet.
Well, he referred to it as a grant of funds, but I don't know if it's a competitive process or not.
So moving on to kind of the bulk of your document there is the building type frontages and the frontage types. And as you recall in the previous slides, I referenced kind of the overview of what the form-based code, this is how it's laid out. As you see in the noted table there, what we did is we combined the building types and the frontage types to work in, collectively and vary depending on what building type is actually planned and programmed versus and allowing some flexibility for the frontage type. The building form component, what that does is defines and regulates the intended physical form, including building form, building height, general land use, parking encroachments, and allowed frontages. And I think you've seen this, and you'll see it in the remaining slides. And then the frontage types creates kind of that appropriate transition from the private to the public realm. And this typically is porches, terraces, stoops, and storefronts and so forth that you see here. So in this particular case, as you see, we took kind of an excerpt of the document, applied it to what that building form would be, which is a live-work type of form. And again, you will note, based on the noted legend, how to interpret and apply the particular building form and building type. And as I noted earlier, we do try to, with the form-based code, to rely on a lot of minimums to allow that flexibility. So in this case, you do see a lot of minimums here for the live-work option. A lot of it has to do with convertibility, as having an upstairs functioning and then possibly converting a downstairs to a live-work type of unit later in the future to more residential and vice versa. And then in the next one, and I think what I'll do is I'll kind of go through these fairly quick. If you want to talk specifics, feel free to do that. I think either at the end of my section here or at the end as it pertains to specific kind of requirements and standards here. So this particular one is your townhouse and stack flats and the courtyard type of buildings. And this reflects the various minimum and heights. We do have some maximum heights in this case, which is 4 and 5 stories, dependent on the type of use or program building type. Sorry. And then this is your traditional commercial. We do, have a maximum height in this case. I think what we're trying to achieve here again is mixed use. We're trying to not see your commercial building that's kind of laid out in various areas of the city. What we want to do is try to integrate and create an activity of the pedestrian environment on the ground floor. So this is the commercial type. And then here on the building form, what we try to do here is, with the red coding, is give you an indication of how the document would work. You see the photos. Those represent the various building types and correlated to the frontage types. So as you see, the allowed, those correspond to the frontage type as indicated. And then we do the same here for dooryard and shop front, A meaning allowed, and we give you the kind of the representation of what that means as it pertains to the building type and frontage type and then the building form. And then lastly, the gallery and terrace building type and the frontage type that corresponds to those particular building types and frontages. So at this point, I'm sure you probably have some questions regarding a lot of the indicators and guidelines stated in the document. I'm open to kind of open the door and talk about that right now, or we can kind of breeze through this civic space and get to closure and then kind of wrap it up and have more of a comprehensive discussion if you would like to do that.
So I'll start to my left if there are any comments or questions. Commissioner Olson? Mr. Leiby? Okay, no? Okay. That's the first.
So as you may recall, we showed 4 alternative ways of meeting those previous planning objectives that Jim spoke about. And the initial way that we described them was that there were frameworks that had land uses that could be configured in various different ways. The 2 elements that were primarily, the 2 components, excuse me, that primarily made up the framework plan were open space and road configuration, and I'll go through those next 2 chapters with you. The civic space is broken down, again, sort of similar, into a hierarchy where we go from neighborhood square all the way down to a community garden. And we see that as they shift, they go from being somewhat large in size to very small in size, and then the formality of how the site is programmed, whether it has active or passive recreation, whether it's programmed for civic uses or it's just a community space that has maybe trail and a drinking fountain or an ancillary structure. Those range as we go from this neighborhood square to the community garden. The next slide will have a community garden. So I thought I'd just expand a little bit on these first 3 options that are available for our civic spaces. When we were looking at ways to communicate the importance of the view corridors, the ones that we talked about either looking on from Tower Bridge Gateway or the terminus of West Capitol Avenue, we began to look at formal plaza or civic spaces to communicate that importance and to have that be the focal point for some of the commercial building forms and frontage types that Jim just got done discussing. It's the next types that we have. Excuse me. That are definitely more driven towards the residential user, and they're more designed to create those interesting little open spaces that help relieve some of the congestion that we can feel in a tightly developed urban community. And so you see that we're trying to encourage a multi-generational project here by allowing for playgrounds and pocket parks to exist, and then also in light of all the discussion that we've had from the council about looking at paying homage to not only our agricultural history, but promoting local food production, we've included a community garden concept. And this becomes very useful when we start looking at some of the nuisances that we have around this site, i.e. the railroad. These little opportunities for green space provide that buffer from that nuisance that a residence could go across from, and it's essential that we have this large scale of options to communicate very different impacts and effects that we're trying to accomplish with this project. Do you have any questions, or I'll just move on to the right-of-way? So the thoroughfares section is probably one of the more complex chapters that our consultant put together, because it really doesn't explain what right-of-ways we're proposing. It provides a palette of different right-of-way options that could work with the different alternatives, but focuses on its relationship to what the street is designed to do, what its character is, and how it will relate to the use that's being prescribed by the developer. So for example, you see that one of the types that's listed as CS, it's the bottom of the red box. It's a commercial street, it has raised curbs, and it was looking to separate the pedestrian experience from the vehicular experience, because we're looking to have the pedestrians have interesting windows and shop frontages to look at, and we want them to feel safe and secure. So we're blending that nature of what's happening in the public realm versus what we expect to happen in the private realm, and we're prescribing that. So there's flexibility, but as Jim said earlier, there's prescription about how that will occur. So we have about 12 different right-of-way types, and they're described by what type of street they are, how wide the right-of-way is, and that's basically back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk, and then how wide the pavement width is. How much do we expect, how much travel do we expect to occur, whether it's bicycle or vehicular travel that we expect to occur within the right-of-way, and that lends itself to what kind of frontage types do you anticipate having. You're not going to have residential fronting immediately onto a freeway because that doesn't match, versus you're not going to have retail fronting onto an alleyway because that doesn't really match either, unless you're Sacramento, and they've managed to make that work pretty successful. That's not our objective here. We're meant to use the alleys as driveways, going back to the previous discussion we had about parking and making sure that whatever parking we have doesn't interrupt traffic flowing. So when you combine the type, the width, and the right-of-way width together, that's what you get the type. So how does this all work with bicycles? And that's the last component of this classification system that our consultant came up with. And some of our right-of-ways have bicycle lanes that are 6 feet wide, and some of them don't. And that's really meant to communicate, again, what we're trying to accomplish with that street. And that falls into how are we trying to work into this larger bicycle master plan that the city is undertaking, and how are we encouraging people who live locally, who are taking their bikes to maybe go to Lebu or pick up some milk at Safeway, versus traveling east-west, commuting through this site perhaps. And so we're trying to manage those expectations, and we might expect a commuter to come through if we have a coffee shop nearby, but we also might expect that someone from the Washington neighborhood would take their bicycle over here as well. And so we want to make sure that we're blending those users together. So this is an example of how you would apply those thoroughfare standards to one of the options, option A, which includes that large civic space that we see in between the buildings along West Capitol Avenue. And you can see that that has a 28-foot wide right-of-way area to accommodate two-way traffic around that space, but it has very narrow sidewalks and very little green space because it's focusing all the attention onto that civic space. And then you see that the connector to it, which is the connector to it that goes along West Capitol Avenue, that's kept wider than this access road that's going sort of north-south that's breaking up that block. That's a little bit narrower, that's a little bit cozier, because we expect that there would be some maybe some live-work office space, some maybe residential space that could convert to a live-work or service-oriented use. And then you see along the back of the former Experience site along the freeway, that's an alleyway or an access road that's accessing into the residential property. So you can see how, depending upon where you locate your buildings, how you want to use those buildings, you can see that lends itself to the traffic flow, and that gives you lots of different options to determine what type of right-of-way is most appropriate for the development that will occur. Are there any questions about that chapter? Okay, thank you.
Real quick, just like to touch on, and I think I stated this in the beginning presentation, that there is a component with architectural guidelines. They did look into, recommended by some comments they heard from the Planning Commission as well as the community, to maybe look at the context of the kind of regional. So there was some effort made to kind of capture some forms that we see over in Old Sacramento. And then in addition, in the guidelines that are in your document, you do see more of the contemporary type of form that we've been seeing throughout the city and other areas. These design styles and forms are basically to be used as guidance. And again, the key components of the guidelines is massing and composition and frontage areas as relates to storefronts and openings, and the site definition as it relates to the layout of the site. Those are key elements of the guidelines, and again, architecture will be eventually reviewed by staff at a staff level approval as it is currently. So as we conclude, what we're trying to do here is seek the Planning Commission's approval to recommend this document to City Council. In doing so, and with that approval, we will return, because the council, as I mentioned, already saw this in a workshop format. We will return to the council in a workshop format with this particular document. Definitely we're wanting to entertain and have a good discussion with the commissioners, as well as we will forward any comments and make any fine-tuning revisions to the document based on some discussion here today. But we do want to, emphasize that we are looking to get this document in front of council in a workshop in a matter of a couple weeks, and then from there to final approval. We are controlled to some degree as far as the amount of changes and modifications that we can do to the document by the grant. Our grant period runs to the end of February. After that, any time that staff spends on this document will be part of the general fund time that we have allocated and dedicated to finish the document. So we're hopeful that we're not retooling the document. That's not our plan. In addition, there is a Chapter 7 within the document, and we created that particular chapter because there was a lot of input from the council that was at kind of higher level, above the trees kind of discussion on forward thinking to the future of the site, and that's some of the things that we need to flesh out with the council when we return with this document in a workshop as well. So this concludes staff's presentation, and we're open to hear any questions and move this project along. Thanks.
Thank you. So before we open the public hearing, are there any clarifying questions or points anybody wants to make at this time?
I think I have a question. If what we recommended last time, is that what we're going to recommend this time? Or are we recommending what the council recommended? I'm still a little confused by the last page.
You're referring to Chapter 7, or?
Yeah, I guess I'm referring to Chapter 7.
Okay. Well, Chapter 7 is an action plan for implementation, the next level of where we take this site. The action plan and control of the site will be, is in the hands of the city. We control site, control. So Chapter 7 essentially further alongs development implementation goals based on council discussion at the workshop meeting. So those particular elements of Chapter 7 will have to be further vetted out with the council in our next go-around. So essentially what you are approving is a full document with the somewhat of the draft discussion related to the implementation strategies that are found in Chapter 7. So essentially, Chapter 7 is a reiteration of what is a delivery of information that we heard from council at the workshop meeting.
Okay, I don't know if you're going to answer my question, Jimmy, but I mean, our recommendation was to do kind of Plan B, and their recommendation was C. So am I voting for B and telling them good luck?
Okay.
So I understand now which last page you're referring to. You're referring to the council comments that are included in the appendix. Right. So the selection of the preferred alternative will occur at the council level, but we are very interested in what the planning commissioner's comments and opinions are on what the preferred alternative would be.
But we did that.
If you have any additional information, we'd be happy to take it and pass it along to the council.
Oh. Well, isn't the difference that we wanted to keep West Capitol Avenue open and all the way through, and doesn't C close it?
Several of the council members expressed some of this concern that the Planning Commission had about closing the West Capitol Avenue connection. There was an understanding that that may be unavoidable due to repairs that are needed to the overpass, so longer and heavier trains by Union Pacific can cross them. They did not recommend that we approve option C at the city council, however. They gave staff direction to go back and work with the consultant on a revised option B that includes a Paseo effect that is similar to the Tower Bridge Gateway Paseo effect on option C. We've not presented that yet to council.
Okay, but a lot of their assumptions are the fact that we're expecting to have a streetcar there. Would that be a fair assumption? They're assuming that we're going to have a streetcar.
There's a planned route to route a streetcar in
There-
front of this particular site, yes.
Okay. Will that affect our parking then?
Yes, that's actually a direction that we got from council. To quote the mayor, we should have a high fidelity to all of our visions for this area, and that when we look at parking specifically and its relationship to urban density, having a high dense project, it was related to streetcar.
And I understand that, but so if we use that same philosophy and we don't have a streetcar, we're not going to allow somebody to build here with these high densities and no parking or limited parking if we don't have a streetcar in place, are we?
So the maximum parking ratios, to answer your question, are 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit and 2.25 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. That's,
Well, I understand, and
Yeah.
I'm not even sure that that's enough in this area when you're having all this commercial-type activity there. Because my concern of this area was the same, I think the same comment I had before, is I don't want to see us allow development to happen there, assuming we're going to have a trolley car or streetcar availability, and cut back our parking so that we have something like we've created across the street, where we thought that the whole school was going to show up on the buses, and they never did, and now we don't have parking for them, so that the people in that area would have to go park down at Capitol Bowl. I mean, you don't need them at the bowling alley parking to go to that area. We need them parking on the site. So I'm a little, I guess I'm a little confused that I don't quite understand how we're going to park people, and are we going to have enough parking if we don't have the trolley? And are we going to allow somebody to develop this site prior to us being assured that we have a trolley or a streetcar with lower parking?
I would say development, no different than the Bridge District. Development is going to occur incrementally. Definitely one of the concerns and issues that we see with the Bridge District with new development coming on board and online is, the tight parking requirement. And what we plan to do with this document, and as we advance it, would be to get a little bit more clarity on this topic in discussion with council as it relates to the interim type of parking arrangement. As I mentioned, it will be developed incrementally. If we do have our planned streetcar, if that grant is awarded, and we do see construction in 2015, there's two ways to look at it. Maybe, hopefully, we have some development on this site and we have adequate interim parking to support that. But then at that time in 2015, streetcar comes online, then the document gives us the ability to kind of do a flip on the parking and program the build out at a higher density, as Ms. Yancey mentioned, so that we do have that ability to capture it based on that condition if we do see the growth pattern on this site.
And I don't know if I asked this question before, but is this property owned by the city or by our redevelopment?
I'll answer that question. So the Experience site, which is the most northern parcels, those are owned by the city. The Delta Lane site, which is the most southern parcel on the southern side of Tower Bridge Gateway, is also owned by the city. The Tower Court site is owned by the successor agency. And staff that's been working on the dissolution of the redevelopment agency has been working diligently on preparing a plan about how that site could potentially be sold, I guess is the best term that I would use, although that's not technically the correct term, to the city for future development uses. Recently, an assembly bill was passed, 1484, that requires the preparation of a long-term property management plan. On March 6th, we're going to be going in front of the City Council to do a small informational item and ask for request as the ask for recommendation, as the successor agency to give us the authority to begin putting together that plan so we can effectuate the transfer from the successor agency to the city. So we'll have one city-owned consolidated site.
And that would be providing the state allows us to do that?
The law that was recently passed does provide a mechanism. It's a time-consuming mechanism, but nonetheless provides one. So in answer to your other question, it will take some time for us to get this site ready for development.
Well, I'm sure it's not going to be easy. I just happened to think about it later, and I don't know if I asked the first time, but if it's redevelopment, then it kind of throws a little bit of a gray haze over everything.
It does create an obstacle, not an
Yeah.
insurmountable one, but it does.
Okay.
So if I heard correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's going to be further discussion regarding parking concerns with council. And is the document living enough that should the streetcar not come in, that those concerns can be addressed down the road as development goes into the area?
Absolutely.
And if the resolution passes tonight, the commission's comments regarding concerns about parking would also be brought to council.
Definitely. Great comments. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
So are there any other clarifying comments or questions at this time before we open the public hearing?
We'll withhold comments until after.
Okay, so at this time, we'll open the public hearing, and as I see no requests to speak, we'll close the public hearing, and we'll bring it back to commission again for comments. So I will start again to my left with Commissioner Olson, if there's anything.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very thorough, and I feel like I actually learned a lot from this. It was very informative, and you guys did a great job with it.
Thank you.
So thank you. That's my only comment.
Thanks, Jim and Katie. I agree. It was a very nice presentation. I have some editorial comments and then some questions as well. So in the interest of time, because I did flag the heck out of this document, I'll just flip through them. Page 1-3, there's that map. This came up with me before. Those red lines are impossible for me to see. I'm not sure if anybody else is having a problem identifying it, but the project area is invisible to me. So if I would maybe suggest a different line color. So chapter 2, page 2-3, it references a figure. The figure has a grid system and blocks, and then one with a bunch of cul-de-sacs. And I can infer what we're talking about, but I would maybe recommend a figure 1A, figure 1B, or some sort of reference to what portion of that figure you're actually referring to. Again, you can generally infer it, but I had a question on one of those points. So a direction on which half would be beneficial. Getting to something that Charlie asked about on parking, the parking ratio of 1.5 for residential and 2.25 for business, how does that relate to what we've already approved for the Bridge District?
It's a higher number. The Bridge District is lower, I believe.
Okay.
More aggressive, yes.
Just by a little bit, right?
Just by a little bit.
Just by a little bit, okay. So I'm going to jump all the way to chapter 6, page 6-6. Not that it matters where, but signage. I'm not going to miss this one ever again. Signage, it's fine how it's written, but I would like to add something to it, that we limit signage to either the second or third story and below. I don't really want to see a skyline of signs, and I understand that this is just a corner, but I'm sorry, I missed this in the Bridge District, and I don't want to see it popping up throughout the rest of the city. So that is a request of mine to the rest of the commission that we add to that.
So with that, I'm just curious, if you had sort of storefront businesses there, would that eliminate signage as you see in this picture? Is that what we're talking about?
No, I'm saying no big signs above, say, the third story.
Okay.
For example,
I misunderstood.
CalSTRS
Gotcha.
along the riverfront has a big sign on the top of their building. That would not be allowed.
Can I just ask for a clarification and to kind of further discussion? In a case where you have, you said using the limit of 3 stories, in the case you have a 4-story building or 5-story, I want you to think in your design mind, because you and I really talk of design a lot. How would that look based on your statement? Because you would have, a building, say it's like a, prominent insurance company or something, Liberty Mutual, whatever, and they have their logo, their sign, and then you have it on that facade only at the 3rd story, but you got 2 more stories and floors of a building where traditionally you see that image, logo, sign kind of on the top part of the parapet wall as opposed to mid stream of the building. So just adding clarification that we can definitely add it, but I wanted to pose that question.
Historical buildings, I can recall seeing the names of the building on the top of them, but it's not really an advertisement type sign. I'm just getting away from the big blocky letters, especially lit up on the tops of the buildings. So I would imagine in an urban environment, your signage needs to be closer to the street level. I don't see a need for us to be advertising at an upper level who's occupying the building. Just in the urban setting. Are there thoughts on this?
But, my thought was, and I like the idea that we do that downtown, that we keep it as low as we can. But you should say, on the off chance that maybe you want to do it, you can't do it without getting a conditional use permit for it.
I agree.
So I was gonna ask if there was a check, but at this point, are we just sort of making recommendations to council on revisions to this document? Is this a revision we're gonna ask to make at this point? Or are we gonna say, at the end of this, let's if it moves forward, let it move forward with these specific concerns of the Planning Commission, Commissioner Moore's concerns regarding parking, Commissioner Levick's concerns regarding signage.
I think what I heard from Commissioner Liebig is specifically that he wanted to prescribe this to the future development of this particular planning area. So it would be conveyed to council that you added this to the guidelines of Chapter 6, and if the council so choose, they could discuss, or it would not be discussed, and then it would be approved to form.
That is my request, to have this
Okay.
included, so when they see it, it is included in this.
No problem. Okay.
And I do like the idea of a way that it could be considered with a conditional use permit or other mechanism. I'm not sure how, if we want to just say zoning. I don't want to say zoning administrator action. I say conditional use permit. So. Okay, thank you, and almost through. Lighting, page 6-10, just to be consistent with the general plan, I would just say, and downward facing.
That's fine.
Okay. And the parking, I'm in Chapter 7, implementation. Back to parking, there's a section, or there's a bulleted number about structured parking, but in the revised plans, A, B, and C, there are actually no structured parking buildings left. Did we intentionally remove those? And yet we're still describing them.
Can you give us a page number?
I'm sorry, option C, I didn't see option C's.
Okay.
Is this on, I'm sorry, we're sharing notes here. Are there parking structures in the revised plans, A, B, and C?
I'll answer that question for you. So options A, B, and C, as they are shown in the appendix, show on options A and B that is a wrapped structure.
Getting away from the appendix though, because the appendix is what we previously discussed. So if we go into implementation, for example, page 7-8, I'll just pick out, looking at A, that parking structure that's shown in appendix A is called a mid-rise.
It's referring to the wrap.
What's that?
It's referring to the wrap of the structure. It's just a poor placement of a dot.
Okay, so these are still parking structures.
That is correct.
Thank you. I actually thought they got eliminated. That was just my bad. Okay. On that note, getting back to page 7-5, structured parking, the location of the public parking structure should be considered in the design of the street and block network within the project area. I would just like a little bit more guidance provided. For example, say internal to the block, or how, I mean, I know the city has a lot of language behind this already as far as where parking structures should be placed. Or are you saying considered by the design review committee?
I could have a moment before I respond.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I believe the intent of some of this language is to ensure that when we do build a parking structure, one, that it is wrapped with a pedestrian-friendly experience, so we don't end up with a situation where someone's walking by a parking structure and fumes are coming out and it's not very attractive. Two, that we also take into consideration the ingress and egress associated with the parking garage and the stacking that occurs sometimes when that facility is being heavily used. One of the things that I talked about in the thoroughfare section was making sure that we take those things into consideration as we're picking our road segments. And how they
I
relate.
agree 100%.
Okay.
The comment I'm trying to make is, how is it to be considered? Is it to be considered by the design review committee? Is it to be considered by staff in the permitting somehow? Or is it just to be considered?
I get you. Yeah.
Because considered has no weight.
Yeah. Go ahead.
One of the bullet points on 7-14, under develop and implement a comprehensive parking program for the project, we can expand on that a little bit. I think we were trying to get at what you were saying, under analyze the construction and operation of a public parking structure on the site, and just the entire comprehensive program. We can expand this bullet point, since it's in draft, to address the concerns.
Okay, thank you. Same page, unbundling parking costs. I like this idea. I'm familiar with it. Sandra gave us a presentation on this before, but we were unable to unbundle last time. I believe we approached this. Is there a mechanism that we can do this now?
I would refer to our city attorney. I wasn't here in that presentation, and I don't recall. Not that.
We've actually not researched this in greater detail. It was initially brought to our attention, but it was put on hold. So unfortunately, I don't have a response for you.
Okay. So to be considered. That's fine. I'm not hard set on that one, not nearly as much as I am on the signs. So I told you I had a lot of flags.
That's all right.
Okay, in Chapter 7, getting to the actual plans themselves now. Now, we're making a recommendation for a plan, and council will then make a recommendation for a plan, or are they voting on a plan? I guess
Yeah,
I'm not
go
sure, along with Charlie, I'm not sure of this step.
We will request that they select a preferred alternative for the purposes of assisting in effectuating the transfer from the successor agency to the city. That will help in demonstrating that the site is ready for future development. That is a term that's used in the law that allows for those transfers to occur. we will request that the council does that. I don't know that they will feel comfortable without having a better sense of what the development is, the status of streetcar, the analysis that needs to be done on parking, the overall comprehensive analysis that's being done related to riverfront parking garages. I'm uncertain at this time if they'll actually feel comfortable making that recommendation.
Okay. My comments on the plans, they're generally focused towards frontage types. As we've looked at the layouts, we've looked at the streets. I'm still unsure about the underpass underneath the railroad tracks, what's going to happen with that, so it's hard to make a recommendation on that. But I do particularly like in building, in the build-out option A, there's the shop front terrace. I think that's a great idea for restaurants and maybe some other businesses where you'll have some seating outside. It is only in A. The odd thing is it's also on Tower Bridge Gateway, which isn't, it's not really the best place to put outdoor seating. I would like to see more internal use of the shopfront galleries and the shopfront terraces. It's closer to the, some terraces closer to the parks or along the parks, I think would create a really nice setting to promote restaurants, for example, in this area. B actually, I think, goes a little bit farther away from that in that you don't even get as much shopfront gallery along a park setting. So it's just more of the dooryard. So I would like to see if we go along with B, again, more shopfront gallery or terrace closer to the parks or the plazas to really take advantage of those features. That's it for me. Thank you again.
Commissioner Sadie?
I'm actually grateful that the council requested to have a, I suppose, I don't know if it's more focus, but for us to be true to the city vision, and then that Chapter 7 was added. I somewhat disagree, though, about the signage matter about being too prescriptive, because I'm feeling that this form-based approach is a little different than needing to come back and asking for variances. I think the whole idea, and I'm not a planner by profession, but I feel like the whole idea is to actually provide flexibility in the sense that it relates to scale and scope and needs and visualization. I happen to actually like the CalSTRS sign, so we don't agree there. But I think if there, I would be okay with something about the signage needs to relate to the scale and the streetscape, or something that's probably a little bit less less precise, so may not be comfortable to you, but I feel like that's the whole beauty of this approach. So, but again, I am grateful that council kind of pushed this, us to think about the importance of this space in terms of the gateway to the city. Other than that, I feel like I think Commissioner Moore kind of mentioned that this has gone to council. They have input. It's kind of like, okay, we said our piece and we've made some suggestions, and here you go. So that's all I got right now. Thanks.
To my right, Commissioner Fromm.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very good. It helped me to learn a lot more about planning and what's going on in the city and all the various different other plans in the region that are going on. And I also appreciate the form-based code model that was utilized here as it was prepared, because I think it incorporated what is going on in our region and what we like to do for the future. I like the flexibility for us to be able to come back and take a look at the implementation as you move forward. And in taking a look at the specific action, points that you have in Chapter 7, if there's a way for us to be able to see what next steps you have taken and receive additional updates on those, so that we can continue to provide feedback. I think that this being a live document, I would like for us to continue to provide input as we move forward, especially if there is a grant for the streetcar. You know, taking a look at what that grant looks like, what the city needs to do to prepare, and where we are in the planning of this in the future. So, in addition, you know, taking a look at places where I've lived in the past, some of the things I appreciated is having a cultural activity for the neighborhood. And in taking a look at, if we're looking at option B, having a space so that there are, you know, whatever activities that region or someplace else in the city would like to gather and have a kind of like a community event, that there is enough space for that. So it's convertible for various activities. And I don't know how to incorporate that in there. Because I think it allows for the rest of the city to take advantage of this site and just being able to, you know, get acclimated and learn about it as they move forward. And, you know, I do appreciate the comments on the signage because I think it's important that we do have some level of oversight. I think some can get a little too much out there, but I just want to be able to see what we can do to provide some input on that in the future, if at all possible. And that pretty much summarizes my points at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Katie, I'm glad you came on board because I like pictures. It helps me a lot. Jim never gives me pictures. He just gives me tons of paper to read. But I got to tell you, I on the comment on the sign, like Beverly, I actually like the Cal Stir signs. I didn't know that you really didn't like the sign. I thought it looked kind of neat. But downtown is a different thing, and that's the only reason I was saying that, you know, we've moved all our signs to a street-type sign in the downtown area, with maybe the exception of U-Haul. I don't know if they've come down yet, but I mean, even the big Safeway sign came down. So I'm not encouraging people to do it, but there's always the possibility there is that big user that would build an office downtown. And I really wouldn't be opposed to them putting their name on the office. But if it's a bunch of small shops, then I think the signage needs to be on that first floor level. And if we have residential above it, of course, I wouldn't want to put a restaurant sign on the top of a residential building, if that makes sense. But, you know, so I think I have some of the same concerns, though, of the downtown area. And I would like to see us at least have the conditional use part of that if somebody wants to put it up there. I don't think that's asking a lot of anything. And I think Russ pretty much touched on some of the other stuff that I was going to talk about. And I'm still not convinced I understand what's going on with West Capitol Avenue, because even if the railroad has to come in and rebuild the trestle, that means they're going to build it even better, and they could probably make it a little wider and it'd make it a better access point. But I hate to see us cut that off, because that's been discussed many times in the past, and it's never been something that the people in the community wanted to see, was to see West Capitol Avenue completely cut off. So if we can include that as just a comment going forward, I'd be happy. Otherwise, I thought you guys did a great job. Thank you.
Chris?
I was actually very excited when I opened up my packet on Monday, because I have a lot of friends and family that use this area to go downtown, and I use it often myself. And they're always asking me, you know, what's going on with that area, especially when the roads are being developed. You know, what's that road going to be called? And before the signs are up. So all the pictures were fantastic as well, because now I get to, when people ask me, I can actually refer to something. So I would like to thank you, staff, for putting this together. I do have a big concern about West Capitol being closed off. It just doesn't, it seems like it would be a backward step for the development of the area. That's probably my main concern about that. That's about it. Just thank you.
Thank you. So I don't think I have much new to add to the comments. I do agree with a little bit with what everybody said. I agree that I appreciate the flexibility in the plan. I think that's very important. I share Commissioner Moore's concerns with parking and at least having some flexibility to deviate should the need arise. We don't know what the future brings. I know we're all hopeful, but at least having some the ability to deviate there. And I agree with Commissioner Liebig's comments regarding storefront terrace type view for shops or for restaurants. I think that's a good idea. And I think if those comments can be brought forward and there's a way to incorporate that piece into whatever option is finally picked, I think that'd be a good idea. So I do agree with that. So it sounds like we've had some sort of discussion regarding where we go with the signs, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to sort of resolve that moving forward, whether it's a permanent change to the document or whether it's recommendations to council to consider. And I don't know if I missed it or not. I'm not quite sure where we would bring in, if it was a permanent change, where that level would start. Would it be the second story? Would it be the third story? I too don't have a lot of issue with the CalSTRS sign. And I could see the need, as Commissioner Moore said, that we may get some sort of end user that has a sign at a level that is appropriate for that building, or maybe a signature piece in that area. I just don't know at this point. So I'm looking for some recommendations on how we sort of capture that and sort of get everybody's wishes resolved here and move this forward.
Sure. I have to say, surprisingly, I actually like Commissioner Moore's kind of thought process on the signage. It makes sense that if you do have a mixed-use building, you have the tenant upstairs, that you should regulate the signage to kind of that ground floor pedestrian kind of activity. So that does make sense in that regard. It is, I think, still, an issue of we need to kind of vet out and get some clarity on it is if you do have that 4 or 5 story commercial building, then what? Not to say that, that's what we're seeking, but the plan is built that way to accommodate that if it occurs. We, can restrict it in some regards the same way that we would do a mixed use type, but I think, Commissioner Moore was on to something with that kind of ground floor, maybe second floor if you had residential up top. It just really, I think, is a matter of the commission giving us that guidance on what they want to do in that condition where it's just a straight kind of commercial office type of building that accommodates and takes up that entire building. Then what? And it's so. We're open to the use.
Is there a check at this point without requiring a CUP or?
Yeah. Pretty much, signage goes through an over-the-counter permit. We look at our sign guidelines. Commissioner Moore was accurate that we, invoked and got a lot of the signage to come down in its height, and we're, been successful. So there's a height limitation in that regards to the monument type of signage. Building signage is really something that's driven by the frontage type of the building, and then there are a lot of certain square footage, and we don't at this point control the placement of a sign other than to say that it cannot project above the parapet or cornice. So that's the limit that we go on signage. So
Jim, could I just make a comment, though?
Sure.
I mean, basically, this thing, we're not talking about that big of an area. Most of the businesses, I think, that would come to that area would be ground floor type businesses. So, to me, if it's a ground floor business, their signage, they're going to want it on the ground floor. And if we have an office structure or something comes in that's different than that wants signage above the ground floor, make it conditional then. That would be as simplistic as you could make it, so that it's always on the ground floor, because that's probably what most of them will be. And if it goes beyond that and somebody does something different than that, have them come in and get it. When they're going through the building process, they can just ask to have it put up there.
I have a proposal in a way to implement the commissioner's direction after conferring with council. One of the items in the action plan is to enact proposed land use and zoning changes designed to encourage the mixed use and have those go with the general plan update. We could review the sign ordinance and propose an overlay for this area that takes the commissioners' recommendations into consideration, we could amend this action plan. We could recommend to the city council that we amend this action plan to include doing that.
You want to do it on the sign ordinance rather than do it on this specific plan here?
This is not a specific plan. This is a master plan, so it does not overlay any existing regulations. This is just guidance for design.
So it would be similar on page 7-14, the first bullet at the top. It says enact the proposed land use and zoning changes. So it would be a similar kind of bullet on that page, essentially. It's
Yes.
some of the things that need to happen.
That's correct.
Okay. I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of heartache where it happens, but it would accomplish the goals of the commission at that point to put, now where would if we amended that section, where would the approval come at? Would it come through the CUP process, or would it?
If I may answer that, just to clarify, this is more of a vision plan for the city. However, in order to take specific actions, like we want signage to look a specific way, we're actually going to need to come back both to the Planning Commission and the council to amend certain areas. Now, it could depend. We can have an overlay over the specific area, so there's specific sign requirements that are just applicable here, or we can come back and have them on sort of a case-by-case basis. It's all going to depend. But I guess the bottom line is that with this plan, we're not actually changing anything in the general plan, zoning code, sign ordinance, any of that. This is more the vision of what this area is going to look like, and then we'll come back with mechanisms to actually implement it. Most likely for here. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm totally happy with that,
Okay.
and Charlie's recommendation. So with that, I think that the transitional parking, I didn't hear anybody that was opposed to that, so I think we're in agreement with that. The signage and the bridge, other than editorial, I only captured three additional recommendations. Did I miss any? Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was tracking it.
So did you get all those? Go ahead.
But I think the only, but maybe we may need to put a fine point, and I think the only addition that we're requesting is the action plan bullet regarding some kind of signage action that needs to happen. I think the other two come off as comments to council when this goes when this goes before them. I just want to make sure that, okay, that works for me.
Okay. Are any other comments or clarifications?
I'll move the recommended action
Moved by
Can I have a
Commissioner
question?
with those additions.
Before you make your second.
I'll second.
Seconded by
Could
Commissioner
I ask a
Perez.
question first now? So are we voting then for this amendment just like it is?
Pardon me,
And-
I didn't hear the first part. Are we?
The what are we calling the thing that we're going to send to the council?
You're sending,
Oh, the resolution.
yes,
We're voting for the resolution as it sits?
that's correct.
With the recommended change to the,
Yeah, with your recommendations
Yes.
carrying that on to the city council.
But that doesn't have to be put in the recommendation or the resolution? I'm just not sure how it works.
I can respond to that. That could be in a list form. Staff can prepare it, and in the staff report to the city council, explain that the planning commission wishes the council to consider the following things, and one of them could be
Okay.
signage, parking, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
so we had a motion by Commissioner Sandin. We had a second by Commissioner Perez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The motion carries. Thank you. All right, so we move on to any informal discussion by the commissioners. Okay, I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, could I have informal discussion, only because this is starting to bother me a little bit. We have done our planning for South River Road and what's going to happen there, and we've been under the assumption that we were going to start developing it in the near future, and that doesn't seem to be happening. And, you know, we had our issue with Clark Pacific. I had another issue come up this week. And then last Planning Commission, we had the thing with Frederickson tank lines. I mean, Do you think it might be possible that we should revisit that just a little bit and talk about what we've done?
Yeah, the Pioneer Bluff transition, which is, the South River Road area, is going to be one of the items on the council's priority list, for this year. I don't think we have it posted in here yet, so that will be coming up.
So we
this
will
year.
get a chance. Did the gentleman that was trying to do the repair shop, did he come in and?
He did come in and pick up the use permit application materials. He hasn't submitted them yet.
Okay.
But I think Pioneer Bluff will be talking about in its own area and also in the context of general plan too.
Yeah,
That's
well,
where the
I'm
process
getting a
is.
little concerned that if we're going to start losing jobs out of our city, maybe we've, we kind of thought everything was going really our direction there for a while, and then we've had a little downturn in the economy, and so maybe we need to revisit that. So that was my thought there.
Yeah, so that will be coming up. That'll be on the council's agenda for 2013 for sure.
Thank you.
Well,
Looking for a motion
with that, I'd like to make a motion tonight to adjourn, and I'm going to adjourn it in the memory of Paul Morazzini, Ron Morazzini's father, who just passed away this week.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.